The ever-composed Charles staged a rescue of a damsel in distress. He moved her into a villa, cleared her debts, and set up a shop for her, yet maintained perfect propriety, visiting daily only for meals. His friends couldn't fathom his reasons. He said, "All I crave is this fleeting moment of leisure. Once I return, I'll still be Monica's devoted husband." That day, Eva was sick. When Charles came downstairs, he asked, "Why isn't Eva at school?" Eva looked up from her breakfast and said, "Dad, I'm sick." Charles paused, looked up at me, and asked, "What's going on?" I replied, "The flu. We're heading to the hospital soon." "Is it serious?" "Not too bad. The fever's already gone down." Charles nodded, relieved. "Drive safely, and call me if anything comes up." He kissed Eva goodbye and left. Auntie glanced at me, words caught in her throat. I smiled silently, simply urging Eva to eat faster. I knew what she was getting at. How could the father remain so detached when his child fell ill, only noticing when she'd nearly recovered? In any ordinary household, this would appear utterly bizarre. But I was used to it, so used to it that I no longer cared. After getting everything ready, I drove Eva to the hospital. As we were on our way, we got into a car accident. A car ahead suddenly had an engine failure, triggering a chain reaction collision involving 3 vehicles behind. As the fourth in line, I slammed the brakes just in time to avoid the pileup. I was going to turn the car around and leave when I spotted Charles's car, the one he claimed to have lent to a friend. I once asked him which friend he was referring to. He said, "You don't know them." Such a telling answer. A friend I don't know probably isn't close. If we aren't close, why would he lend them his cars? But I didn't press further, simply playing the fool. Now it's clear he had been lying. The person who got out of the car was someone I clearly recognized. Though we'd only met once, I'd remembered her name. Vanessa. Vanessa anxiously inspected the car and began calling. Somehow I knew that call was meant for Charles. "Eva, watch some cartoons in the car. We'll go to the hospital later, okay?" The daughter nodded obediently. "Okay, Mom." I pulled over and waited. Within half an hour, a black SUV came speeding into view. A man stepped out of the car holding a coat. Vanessa staggered toward him, like she'd found her anchor. The man steadied her, draped his coat over her shoulders, and guided her into his car. I didn't care to watch the rest. "Eva, sit tight. We're heading to the hospital now." Chapter 2. I'd only met Vanessa once. But before I met her, I'd already heard her name, always mentioned alongside Charles, hinting at some romantic entanglement. To be honest, it's been years since anyone dared to place anyone around Charles. For one, Charles prides himself on his integrity. Secondly, he and his wife shared deep affection. Once, someone foolishly crossed him. He not only terminated all dealings with that person but also gave them a beating. "If my wife gets the wrong idea, I'll kick your ass." After that, things quieted down for years. But not long ago, someone got ideas again. "Seeing you've been married this long with such a grown child, they must have figured President Liu couldn't handle loneliness either." Turns out they read him wrong. The person who told me this was Mrs. Qian. She said that evening was quite dramatic. A young woman who worked as a cocktail waitress was delivered wrapped in a bedsheet, like an emperor summoning a concubine for the night. They thought any man would succumb to such temptation. Yet Charles emerged in under 5 minutes, his face stormy and aura glacial. He summoned his assistant to get the girl a dress and have her sent home. Then came the reckoning. It is said that he stormed into the manager's office and beat him up. Then he called the police to report solicitation, had the man arrested, and subsequently cut off all ties with the company. Mrs. Qian remarked with a blend of admiration and wistfulness, "Mr. Liu has always remained utterly devoted to you." I smiled politely and made small talk, but my heart sank a bit. Always the same? Not really. To outsiders, Charles's attitude towards such matters seems unchanged. But he hid it from me. That alone is unusual. And then there's Charles's attitude towards that girl. If this had happened before, he wouldn't have stayed 5 minutes, let alone had his assistant handle the aftermath. So, I looked into that girl and found she had gone from being a barmaid to Charles's secretary. Chapter 3. I was still working in the study when Charles returned. I spent the day with Eva. So many tasks got delayed. Still working? I'll get some rest then. Wait for me in the living room after your shower. I turned to him.
We need to talk.
Charles instinctively frowned. The air between us instantly grew heavy. He didn't say anything, just gave me a cool glance, closed the door, and walked out. I wasn't sure if he'd wait. He hated when I used that tone with him, just like he vented to his friends. Whenever I bring things up this way, nothing good comes of it. Today was no exception. But I don't want to argue with him, or make a fuss. So when I finished work and saw him sitting in the living room, I said, "How about a drink? Let's chat over it." Charles raised an eyebrow. Truth or dare? I chuckled. Nothing too heavy, just a casual chat. He relaxed, stood up, and grabbed a small piece of cake from the fridge. This was originally for Xiaoman, but it seems she doesn't get to enjoy it. He said, "You have a sensitive stomach. Have something to eat before drinking, and don't do it on an empty stomach. The mood is just right now. If we keep this up and talk things through, we might actually get somewhere." But then this cake popped up. As expected, I'd overestimated myself after all. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Charles said, "A dessert shop I happened to pass by on the way." "Isn't that Vanessa's?" When Vanessa stepped out of the car, I knew Charles hadn't kept his promise. After discovering that Vanessa had become Charles's secretary, I went to his office. It just so happened that Charles wasn't there that day. I asked the assistant, "Where's Vanessa?" He stammered, his face visibly tense. Later, I found her in Charles's private rest area. She was curled up on the single bed, wrapped in the cashmere blanket I'd bought for Charles, her face pale and drawn like she was ill. When she saw me, she looked flustered and quickly got to her feet. I asked her, "Where's Charles?" She bit her lip and said shyly, "I got my period and have cramps. Charles went to get me painkillers and a hot drink." I nodded. Let's wait together. Taking care of a woman on her period, Charles is quite experienced. Because from the first time I got my period, he was the one who made me brown sugar water. He would even blush and go buy me sanitary pads. He knows which painkiller works best. He also knows that women on their period have a poor appetite but like to eat sweets. So he bought Vanessa a type of traditional Chinese medicine that I often take, and also brought her a cup of ginger date tea and a slice of red velvet cake. I handed the items to Vanessa. This medicine works reasonably well, although it doesn't take effect as quickly as painkillers. It has fewer side effects. If you really can't stand it, just take a sick leave. The company does offer some benefits. Vanessa nodded timidly. She looked at Charles, and seeing that Charles was silent, left with a disappointed expression while carrying the items. As soon as the office door closed, Charles called out to me, "Moni." I walked straight into the break room, took out the cashmere blanket, and threw it into the trash can right in front of him. Charles frowned. "You don't have to do this. I just feel sorry for her. There's nothing between us." "Who is she?" "The new secretary." "I asked you, who is she?" This time Charles fell silent. After a long while he told me everything about him and Vanessa. He said she was a poor girl, and the reason she agreed to others was to pay off her father's gambling debt. She dropped out of school at a young age, couldn't find a proper job, and could only work at a bar selling drinks, yet she was often harassed. That day I met her at the bar, she was being forced to drink. "She is so young and should have a better life, Moni. I only helped her out of pity." Is that so? The suspicious point is that Charles rarely goes to bars. Yet after Vanessa was sent to his room, he coincidentally ran into her at the bar. Was it really a coincidence, or did Charles deliberately go to the bar to find her? It's quite thought-provoking. But I didn't delve deeper, just nodded. I told him, "Quit it, get her a different job." Charles didn't hesitate at all. He agreed right away. He said he wouldn't have any contact with Vanessa again. He said he wouldn't betray me. I believed him. But I didn't expect that he not only kept Vanessa in the villa, but also opened a shop for her. A dessert shop. Chapter 04. My words plunged the atmosphere into a stalemate. Charles' demeanor slowly changed, from scrutiny to indifference. "You investigated me," he said. "Monica, that little girl is already pitiful enough. It's rude of you to do this." I sighed. "Charles, you are in chaos. Caring leads to confusion." Otherwise, you should know that if I hadn't discovered anything, I wouldn't do anything unnecessary. I opened my phone and played the video recorded by the car surveillance in front of him. Some things are not hard to infer. Since she can drive your car, she definitely can stay in your house. So, where is she working now? Charles did not open the video, only quietly lowered his gaze. After a long while, he exhaled a breath of turbid air. Whether you believe it or not, I did not cheat. I did not betray you. I just pity her. The place she lives in is constantly harassed by debt collectors, and she has nowhere to go. She should have a better job instead of relying on selling herself for money. Moni, these matters are trivial to us, but they can change a girl's life. I was not patient enough to listen to him say these things. So I interrupted him. Do you like her? Charles looked at me with increasingly disappointed eyes. Is this all you think about when it comes to relationships between men and women? Monica, my relationship with her is innocent. You shouldn't spread rumors about a girl based on your unfounded assumptions. Charles, this really left me speechless. I had never thought he would say such shameless things. I always thought he was a smart man. One great advantage of a smart person is the ability to communicate. We understand what each other wants to express. We know it in our hearts, so we hit it off immediately. But when did Charles become someone I no longer recognized? His reactions did not meet my expectations. This will make the subsequent matters difficult to handle. But the arrow is on the string and must be released. I cannot let myself and my children fall into too embarrassing a situation. So I decisively spoke up. Charles, let's get a divorce. You can think it over, and when you're ready, we can discuss the details. Chapter 05. I realized long ago that divorce is a complicated matter. Unless both parties reach a consensus, it becomes a long-term battle. All along, I had not sensed any desire for divorce from Charles. Until Vanessa appeared. For the first time, he showed so much interest in a girl other than me. Based on my understanding of him, it was either infatuation or the beginning of it. So I requested that he dismiss Vanessa. I thought he would refuse. But he agreed. Could it be that I was mistaken? Half a month ago, friends visited, and they spoke in the study. One person teased Charles. They say marriage is the grave of love. As the one with the most say, how do you feel about it now? Charles smiled wryly. I couldn't agree more. Huh, a friend exclaimed. What are you feeling, Itchy? Charles let out a sigh. Not exactly, it's just that if I had known marriage would be this boring, I might as well have played around for a few more years. Then why didn't you take the girl to your room when she offered to undress for you? That's a different matter. The friend dismissed it. What different matter as long as you hide it well? What's wrong with having a little fun? This time Charles fell silent. After a long time, he spoke in a tone. Let's talk about it later. Listening to these words, I closed the slightly ajar door and turned to leave. Charles was in the mood for some fun. Whether it was because of that naked girl or the monotony of married life, he was thinking of cheating. And I couldn't wait for him to cheat before getting a divorce. So before he cheated, I had to end this marriage. The thought of wanting a divorce left Charles silent for a long time. He just looked at me as if he were looking at a spoiled child. Not only him, but I also thought about the past. The days when I frequently mentioned divorce. At that time, I was anxious, in pain, yet helpless. I relieved my emotions through arguments exploding by bringing up divorce. But in reality, I didn't really want a divorce. I just didn't know what to do anymore. My relationship with Charles had reached a dead end. With no way out, I could only keep hitting the wall over and over again. Until I was bloodied and broke through the wall. Charles let out a sigh. Moni, there really isn't anything between Vanessa and me. If it bothers you, I'll try not to contact her. Let's not talk about divorce anymore. I don't like hearing it. I also sighed. Charles, don't rush to answer me. Take your time to think about it. Do you really not want a divorce? After all, for you right now, divorce has more advantages than disadvantages. Chapter 06. That night, I parted ways with Charles unhappily. For the next week, he moved into the guest room, leaving early and returning late, not saying a word to me. Eva smoothed out the wrinkles on the storybook. Mom, when will Dad come home? What's wrong? I want to read this storybook with Dad. Can't Mom read it with you? The little girl looked at me and said, but I want to watch this with Dad. A pang of bitterness surged in my heart. It seemed I could no longer afford to wait passively. The villa where Vanessa lives is not far from our home. It was given by someone during the debt settlement. I went to the security room using the excuse of a lost item and requested to review the surveillance footage with a security guard. During this week, Charles came every day, without fail, driving in during the afternoon and leaving 1 or 2 hours later. Now there is less than an hour until he arrives. The main gate has a password lock. I have long forgotten what the password is. I can only knock on the door. The door was quickly opened, and a bright little face peeked out. "Why are you today?" Seeing me, the smile on her face froze, and she stood there in a daze. Looking at her wearing an apron, I asked, "Are you cooking?" Vanessa clutched the hem of her clothes. "Miss Sue," I nodded and stepped aside as she walked in. Vanessa followed me and asked, "Miss Sue, do you have something to discuss?" "I'm sorry," I said. "I need to reclaim the rights to this house." "You have an hour to pack your things. Is that enough? Do you need me to help you find a moving company? By the way, about that dessert shop, do you want to return the startup funds to me? Or should I take back the shop?" Vanessa opened her eyes wide. The original caution turned into anger. "What right do you have?" I smiled and said, "This is marital property." Vanessa fell silent. She took a step back and shook her head. "Miss Sue, this is between me and Charles. You have no right to interfere." "All right, then let's wait for him." I found a place to sit down while Vanessa remained standing. After an unknown amount of time, she broke the silence. "Miss Sue, do you know how much Charles doesn't want to go back to that home?" "Oh, how much does he not want to?" She curled her lips, her eyes filled with sarcasm. She said, "He would rather work overtime at the company, rather go to the club to drink. Do you know that he smokes in the car for half an hour every day after getting home before going inside?" "Miss Sue, actually my relationship with Charles is not as sordid as you think. He just wants to relax here. He is under too much pressure, and I can help him unwind. Do you want to strip away his last bit of space?" "Miss Sue, you make your husband not even want to come home. How much of a failure are you as a wife?" "Did you hear that?" I suddenly spoke up. "What?" Vanessa looked confused. I raised my phone and said to the person on the other end, "Charles, did you hear what your little girl said?" The other side was silent. I continued, "I can't imagine how devastated I would be if I still loved you and heard those words. But fortunately, I no longer love you. Charles the First don't love you anymore. Let's get a divorce as soon as possible. I'll give you 2 days to think it over, and if I don't get the answer, I'll file a lawsuit." Chapter 07. That day, Charles ultimately did not stay at Vanessa's place for dinner. When he returned, not only Eva, but even the aunt was surprised and quickly cooked 2 more dishes. At the dining table, Eva was very excited, chattering nonstop about the fun things in kindergarten. Charles rarely didn't tell her, talk less during meals. After dinner, we accompanied Eva to play games together. She pulled Charles to look at the storybook she had kept for a long time and finally fell asleep contentedly. Coming out of Eva's room, we tacitly went to the living room. This time it was Charles who spoke first. "Moni, there are some things I don't know how to tell you." Instead, a chance encounter like Vanessa allows me to vent a little. "Moni, there really is nothing between Vanessa and me. You can see our relationship as a quid pro quo. I provide her with help and she acts as my emotional garbage, can nothing more. Moni, I don't want to bring negative emotions home to you. I always think that I just need this moment of leisure, and when I get home, I will still be a good husband to Monica." Men and women seem to be forever out of sync. Once I was very eager to hear Charles' true thoughts, but he was always reluctant to tell me, even finding me neurotic. But now when he starts to confide in me, I feel disgusted. "Charles, can we not talk about this? What do you think about the divorce?" I mention my obstinacy makes Charles irritated. "Why must it be divorce, you say? And I will change." "I also don't understand. Why do you refuse to divorce? You heard what Vanessa said today. She has those thoughts. Once the window paper is pierced, the rest will follow naturally. Doesn't your current life feel very dull? Isn't divorce the best option?" My words were too blunt. Charles rarely showed such embarrassment on his face. He clenched his fists, looked away, and growled, "I never thought about divorce." I leaned back. "Then you really should think it over, Charles. Our bond is deep. The relationship between the 2 families is here, with many connections in the project along with various investments. Most importantly, we have Eva. If we can part amicably, let's not wait until things get ugly, otherwise it will be too embarrassing. I genuinely suggest that if you want to cheat, you should divorce first." I said I never thought about divorce and I won't cheat. "Why don't you believe me? My patience is gradually wearing thin." "What do you want in order to agree to a divorce?" Charles gritted his teeth. "I won't divorce. Why? Because I love you, Charles. As words made me unable to bear it, and I closed my eyes. I gritted my teeth. Don't love me, I beg you, don't love me, Charles. And I grew up together as childhood sweethearts. From school uniforms to wedding dresses, we were each other's first love, and also each other's only. Along this journey, Charles has told me countless times that he loves me. The initial thrill of love. The gentle tenderness upon hearing it again. That feeling of possessing the happiness of the whole world had captivated me for a long time. Until Charles shattered all of it. After one drunken night, he told me that he still loves me, but he does not love Eva. Without you, Eva means nothing to me. Is this considered a love confession? No, it sends chills down my spine. If a person cannot even love their own child, then they should only love themselves. Charles, actually life for you now should be quite comfortable aside from being a bit boring. Right after all, I don't ask you to come home early. I don't ask for your companionship. I don't check your whereabouts. I don't interfere with your plans. You've easily become a father to a 5-year-old child. You have a family and children, yet you don't have to give anything in return. So, is it because you are the beneficiary that you can still say with such confidence that you won't get a divorce after doing so many outrageous things? Here we go again. Here we go again, Charles shouted angrily. Can we just stick to the point and not bring up old issues, Monica? This is really pointless. Are we just talking about the matter at hand? Good, the fact that you want to cheat is already a given, whether it's Vanessa or someone else. Your relationship with Vanessa has already exceeded the bounds of a normal man-woman relationship. I have reasonable suspicion that you have already cheated. I haven't, Charles shouted. I let out a cold laugh. I don't believe you. What would it take for you to believe me? No matter what, I won't believe you. Charles glared at me angrily. Monica, you're being unreasonable. I nodded. So what, Charles? Since I've already filed for divorce, I will do whatever it takes to get out of this marriage. You can take my words as a threat. Charles was expressionless. I continued, or to put it more clearly, your company is at a critical time for going public. You might want to consider whether exposing the scandal would cause more harm or if a peaceful divorce would be less damaging. At that moment, Charles fell silent. I had said everything I could. Now it was up to Charles to choose. He seemed like he hadn't slept all night. In the middle of the night, I went downstairs to get some water and could vaguely see the light coming from the crack under the study door. The next day, we took Eva to kindergarten together. When Eva went inside, Charles said to me, I agree. If this is what you want, then I will satisfy you. Chapter 08. My divorce with Charles went smoothly. Things turned out as I expected. As long as he agreed, everything became simple. Originally, I didn't intend to take too much advantage of Charles in the property division. But he ended up giving me more than half of his fortune. It seemed he noticed my confusion. He took a drag from his cigarette and said lightly, consider it a gift for Eva. I didn't refuse, I accepted it. Our divorce was not hidden from anyone. Soon both sets of parents knew. At first they were furious. They don't understand why we who seem so smooth on the surface would get a divorce. Charles glanced at me and said, it's a lack of emotional harmony. My dad slammed the table and said, are you sure it's not because of another woman, Charles? As parents looked puzzled and asked, what other woman? My mom with a stern face said, the woman he keeps in a villa in the western suburbs. You, faced with the disappointment of his parents and the questioning from my parents, Charles grew increasingly agitated. I have nothing with her. I just feel sorry for her. Believe it or not, my mother held my hand, looking at him with an extremely cold gaze. The beggar by the roadside is also very pitiful. Why don't you bring them home? This sentence left Charles stunned. His expression was complicated. His gaze towards me was hesitant, as if he wanted to say something. Charles moved out of the villa. I didn't make him avoid Eva. Eva held my hand and asked, is Dad going on a business trip? I shook my head and told her Dad won't live here anymore, but if Eva wants to see Dad, she can call him. Dad will also take time every month to take you out to play. Okay, Eva nodded obediently. When leaving, Charles held Eva for a long time with a sense of reluctance. Later, I had the aunt take Eva inside. I knew Charles had something to say to me. He smoked a cigarette, looking somewhat dejected. He said, do we really have to come to this point? Can't we start over? I sighed. How can we start over? Eva is already 5 years old. You missed her first steps. You missed her first words. Do you even remember what her first sentence was? Do you remember when she first called you Dad? What's missed is missed. There's no way to start over. Charles smiled slightly, his face full of sarcasm. Here we go again, you always bring up our relationship as Eva. But Monica, before I was Eva's father, I was first your husband. Yes, that's right, but I no longer love you, and I don't expect any changes or compensations from you as a husband. I just hope you can still be a good dad, but if you can't, that's okay. Adults, after all, it's normal for hopes to be dashed. Charles' actions made his father very angry. He took back Vanessa's shop and kicked Vanessa out of the villa, including that car. Swift and decisive, not only did Vanessa get nothing, but Charles' father also punished Charles. On that day, Eva was also there. When Charles' father was hitting him with a stick, Eva rushed over. She cried out, "Grandpa, don't hit Dad, Dad hurts." The little girl cried, pitifully, her eyes swollen. I held her already red and swollen little arm with a pained heart. Outside the hospital room, Charles stood there hunched over, his hands hanging at his sides, trembling. He looked at me helplessly. I didn't expect Eva to rush over. It's all my fault I didn't protect her well, because Eva was hurt, the Liu family was thrown into chaos. I know no one did it on purpose. I can't blame anyone either. It's just that I still feel a bit sad. Charles, Eva loves you very much. But you don't love her. I don't. Charles looked panicked, vehemently denying it. Eva is timid, afraid of pain, and stubborn. She cries and makes a fuss every time she goes to the hospital. That's why you don't like to accompany her. Once during a blood test, the nurse was holding me down, and she was annoyed. She questioned me. Where is the child's father? Wasn't he just here? Why is he gone now? At that time you were outside smoking and you rejected my call. But you care about Vanessa. She said that when she tested positive for the second time you were there with her, staying the whole night. Do you know how many nights I stayed with Eva when she was coughing, congested, and had a fever? I wiped away the tears at the corners of my eyes with a blank expression. But it's okay, Eva is only 5 years old, you can make it up. I won't tell her that you don't love her, you can still be her good dad. But just one thing, her stepmother can be anyone except Vanessa. Charles was taken aback and quickly said, "How is that possible? And Vanessa?" I interrupted him. "I know you still have contact. I'm just telling you, if you are with Vanessa, I will try to convince Eva not to recognize you as her dad." Charles gripped my hand tightly. "Moni, you still care, don't you?" His eyes were full of expectation. I was stunned for a moment, but quickly understood what he meant. I pushed his hand away with a smile. "I didn't investigate you, nor did I investigate her. She added me on WeChat to tell me. By the way, can you make her stop bothering me in the future? I don't care how good you are to her." Vanessa said Charles gave her 500,000 and found her a new job. She said, "He has always cared for me. Now that you two are divorced, I will take good care of him." But she was being too clever for her own good. A man wants to save a fallen woman, someone who is pure, virtuous, and dignified, not someone with ulterior motives. Now that her true intentions are revealed, having lost her grace, the man must be disappointed. Sure enough, Charles recovered the 500,000 and made her sign an IOU demanding repayment for the money he had previously lent her. Charles said, "I am not being nice to her. I just want to do the right thing in the end. I just want to help people to the very end. Moni, it was my fault." Chapter 09, he said, "I shouldn't have made you so sad because of Vanessa." I laughed and said, "Actually, it's not that bad." "What?" "Vanessa's appearance, rather than making me sad, it is more about making me embarrassed. To care for other women while being married is quite humiliating. It's like being publicly shamed in front of everyone. Really embarrassing." I don't know where my words hit Charles. He quietly looked at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "So you really don't love me anymore?" He looked like he was very sad. He asked me, "When did you start not loving me?" I shook my head. "I don't remember." "So when did you really start wanting a divorce?" I thought for a moment. Maybe since the last time I mentioned divorce, that was 2 years ago. That time we went out for a picnic with friends, bringing the kids along. When encountering peers, Eva was a bit excited and knocked over the condiments meant for the barbecue while running around. At that time I was worried Eva would get hurt. But Charles directly kicked Eva down. He was very angry. Whenever Eva was a bit out of control, he would fly into a rage. But I didn't expect him to hit a child in public. And for the first time I scolded him in public. Because I scolded him, he left the country for half a month without a word. Eva contracted norovirus, vomiting and diarrhea, and I couldn't reach him. His mother had appendicitis, and I took her to the hospital in the middle of the night, but I still couldn't reach him. Later he came back as if nothing had happened, saying he brought me a gift. And I just looked at him and said, let's get a divorce. That was the most resolute I had ever been about divorce. I insisted for a week, but you never relented. You refused to divorce. You coaxed Eva just like countless times before, saying you were wrong, saying you would change. Then I relented and said, forget it, let's not divorce. But Charles, that time wasn't because you had coaxed me back. It was simply because I was exhausted. You disagreed with the divorce, so I could only file a lawsuit, but suing is too troublesome. Without an agreement between both parties, it could take years of hassle. This process is too draining, so I gave up. At the same time, I also gave up my demands of you. Requirements are also a troublesome thing. With requirements come expectations. When expectations are not met, one becomes sad. Rather than this, it would be better not to make any demands from the very beginning. These past 2 years have been smooth for us. I no longer require you to do anything, nor do I expect any changes from you. But I have been waiting for you to show signs of wanting a divorce. I firmly believe you will cheat, and I look forward to your infidelity. I am just waiting to reach an agreement with you before you stray. Someone once commented on my relationship with Charles. They said it was too smooth to last long. Men, like excitement and conquest. If a relationship is too smooth, it loses its challenge. Things that are easily obtainable are often not cherished. At first, I was indifferent. I believed that we could sail smoothly through life because our feelings for each other are strong. We love each other deeply. Young people are like this. They think they are the only lucky ones in the world. Others may never encounter love in their lifetime, but I absolutely can. But they forget that love is like a ghost. We always hear about it, yet no one has ever seen it. Times change, and once vowed promises will fade. All passionate fervor will eventually return to the mundane. Especially for someone like me and Charles, who were originally calm and untroubled, but it's okay. Love is just a stage in life. Losing it during that stage can be very painful. But once you reach the next stage of life, it's just a fleeting sense of loss. We are always moving forward. We will always move forward. Chapter 10. After the divorce, Charles became a devoted father. He spends a day each week taking Eva out on adventures. They visit amusement parks and zoos, and Charles shows her things I never could. Just like Eva said, Dad puts me up on his shoulders so high, but I'm not scared. It's so ironic. What I once exhausted every method to achieve was effortlessly realized after the divorce. Yet there's also a sense of relief. You can't hold on to sand. Instead of tormenting yourself and others, better to loosen your grip. One day Man whispered to me, Dad keeps telling me to invite you to join us, but I won't do it. I asked her curiously, why? She said, because Mom doesn't want to go. Charles's wish to reconcile was practically an open secret. Many of our mutual friends took it for granted that we'd end up reuniting eventually. After so many years together, you can't just walk away from that kind of history. Charles said, I'm patient. I'll eventually win you back. Monica, I'll change and become the person you want me to be. Wait for me, please. I told Charles not to bother, but he refused to listen. Everything changed when I started dating someone. In a fit of rage, Charles lunged to throw a punch, but the guy was younger and more fit. With teary eyes, he begged me not to leave and not to do this to him. You can punish me however you want, Monica. Just please don't do this. I can't bear it. He said he couldn't stand me being with someone else, and even less could he bear Eva calling another man Dad. I promised him, don't worry, you'll always be Eva's father, and she'll have no other dad but you. But that was all there was to it. The rest had nothing to do with him. Charles was baffled. What did I do that was so wrong to deserve this? Monica, am I truly beyond redemption? This question drained all expression from my face. There are many things in this world that come without consequences. Because there are none. Those who are hurt aren't even owed an apology. Charles, you should really think about all these years we've had. You might still owe me and Eva an apology. However, not every I'm sorry gets an it's okay. Chapter 11. Charles is busy. Though running his own business, he was gradually taking on more family responsibilities. Constant overtime work and business trips left him cherishing every private moment with Monica. Yet after their child was born, their alone time vanished completely. But ever since they had a child, they'd hardly had time for just the two of them. Little Eva was fussy to care for, bursting with energy and prone to crying. Even with both a nanny and maternity nurse at home, Charles could still hear her wails echoing through the house daily. That high-pitched noise kept hammering against Charles's eardrums, grating on his nerves. Charles remembered when Monica was recovering after childbirth. One evening, he came home from a business dinner and heard Eva's cries the moment he stepped inside. He asked the nanny why she wasn't comforting the baby. With a gentle smile, she explained that occasional crying was perfectly normal for newborns. When he came home, Monica was thrilled and urged him to come see their daughter. Charles didn't want to, but he couldn't bring himself to refuse. He suppressed his irritation and walked into the nursery. Monica asked him to hold the baby.
He did.
The moment he took her in his arms, she erupted in wails. The shrill cries sent sharp pulses through Charles's temples. Without hesitation, he dropped the baby onto the crib. Back then, Charles didn't see anything wrong with his actions. He believed he had it under control. The crib was close when he dropped her, and with its plush bedding, harm seemed impossible. But Monica went mad. She stood frozen for a few seconds before letting out a shrill scream. Shaking as she cradled her daughter, she glared at Charles with eyes that seemed ready to tear him limb from limb. That was the first time Charles had seen Monica act so irrationally. She ordered him to leave. Through tears, she threatened to call the police, accusing Charles of trying to murder their child. That was the first time Charles perceived Monica as a madwoman. Then came the second instance and the third. During that time, Monica would often say, "Charles, let's talk."
Charles hates this line.
Not again, not again. He doesn't think there's anything worth discussing. Nor does he think he's done anything wrong. Why do I need to spend time with the kid? She's too young to understand anything. We've got a nanny and maternity caregiver at home, haven't we? What's the point of all this effort? What's wrong with me coming home late? I'm already stressed out from work all day, and I can't even relax when I get back. He's already hiding. Why won't they just leave him alone? But Monica was always trailing behind him, muttering nonstop, just like Xiang Lin's wife from Lu Sun's stories. In the past, Charles couldn't comprehend. Xiang Lin's wife was truly unfortunate, so why shouldn't she voice her suffering? But as time went on, Charles began to realize just how irritating it all was. No one can truly understand another's heart.